Hello, humans. Hello, humans. It's Wednesday, December 24, 6:31 a.m. We've had huge storms here, more coming down at the moment, and I'm feeling good. I've adjusted all of my supplements and stuff, and I'm getting them all dialed in, getting ready for next year. Next year is going to be quite energetic. So, this will be a strange little talk, okay? Because we have to explore some things that mostly you won't hear any other place. Perhaps it's because I'm able to think further out than other people or just explore strange areas. But nonetheless, there are things that we have to consider that are going to be coming up in the crises that will affect humans, will afflict us next year. So we, humans have so humans are species-centric. We don't really think about the non-human intelligence and how they organize themselves or any of that. I mean, a few of us nut jobs do, but not very many. Anyway, but we really will need to consider this, okay? As of 2026. I think so we're going to have a crisis. A whole series of them, a whole lot of chaos next year. A lot of things are going to reach the pinnacle of dysfunction or be upended and have to be repaired, and there'll be all kinds of things that will take our attention. All of them mostly involving humans in the species, right, within the species of humanity. Taxes, politics, all this kind of thing. However, in my opinion, 2026 will be dominated by two huge factors, one of which is aliens, and it influences the other, which is religion. And religion influences aliens insofar as our perception. In my opinion, humans have a religion problem, okay? We don't really have an effective paradigm for the planet, for the world, for reality. There are some of us that are coming into it. The consciousness as substrate crowd is growing in numbers and is rapidly moving into totally unexplored space. A lot of very brilliant minds that were hamstrung and captive in academia are jumping on board the idea of consciousness as the substrate because there is no body of work, right? There's no huge body of work, but there's all of the pointers, the data points, the supporting thinking, and so on that we have going back through time in the form of, like the ancient teachings on all of these sorts of things, right? So any event, so consciousness is a substrate within the academia is growing and is going to just balloon, and it'll seriously balloon next year as we hit the aliens issue, right? So sometime next year we're going to have an alien crisis. There will be a lot of other crises going on at the same time that we have this alien crisis that precipitates the alien crises, which are a whole cascading series of things. So that the aliens are here means that we'll have people that will examine their patterns, right? And they'll say, holy fuck, these guys are surveilling our military. They're focusing on our military. They have been for a long time. They're doing it episodically. They're doing it strategically, and we need to pay the fuck attention. We'll also have the whole thing about like medical people that will say, oh my God, can we have those beings on this planet? Are they here already? Or whatever the fuck that we can't deal with. Are they malevolent? Are they going to try and wipe us out with a disease and so on? And then you'll have the aliens and the environment guys, Are aliens connected to chemtrails? Are aliens gassing us? Do they have a secret control over the government and they're converting all humans to, right? So all of these things, all of these weird-ass things that are part of our social order, like, is Jeffrey Epstein connected to aliens? all of these strange things that are ongoing in the species will start being tagged to aliens. Everybody will want to know how much the non-human intelligence is affecting their particular area of interest and their particular point of paranoia. And so your individual paranoia, your individual area of concern, will suddenly find itself involved with aliens. Mostly, I don't know if we're going to, there will be a lot of things like perhaps crocheting, knitting, that we just won't involve aliens, but we'll see. It's going to get astronomy, education, astrology, all different kinds of things, medicine, healthcare, so on, right? Okay, so the big issue that we'll have to deal with, though, is going to be religion, all right? Because we don't have an effective paradigm. We have a disjointed paradigm that is forced on us by the Talmudist. And so in the past, all of, that's why I say that the people in academia who are going to go into consciousness first, consciousness is all, consciousness as a substrate, analysis and reductionism of what that means to science and so forth. All of these guys have the ancient wisdom, ancient understanding to go and use as a source to go and get stuff in terms of, oh, look, I can explore this aspect of it. Anyway, but our paradigm was shifted in the age of enlightenment. As we came out of the Kali Yuga, so prior to the Kali Yuga for 12 or 15,000 years, humanity had understood consciousness to be supreme, to be everything, and that we live in an illusion. During the Kali Yuga, the Talmudist rose in power. The space aliens called the Elohim landed and took over the Judeans, and we were saddled with this Gritology understanding as a result of that. I won't go into the details. You can go and get lost in the research of that for years. In any event, though, so we have this understanding that's totally false. We've abandoned our real understanding that used to dominate humanity for thousands of years, and we've got this bullshit understanding. All right, so this is going to be a crisis for humanity as we go forward, because we don't think appropriately about pending stuff, right? So we don't have a group of people that's dedicated to speculating and thinking and analyzing about, what the fuck we're going to do with aliens, what the fuck they might think, what are these guys likely to be, what do we know about them in terms of their behavior, all of these kind of things, right? I'm not even sure that AI is running, or that the military is running AI analysis on actual reports for anything other than like strategic. They should be able to, or in my opinion, they should be running all of this stuff through there to provide data points for an attempt at a social understanding of how these aliens operate, what's their thinking, and so on, right? We need to know our potential enemy here. Anyway, so we're going to have this crisis in I think it's going to be early in 2026, but there's some reasons to think it won't hit until summer, like June or July. But it's our paradigm versus the aliens issue. And that's going to cascade everything else, and it's going to seriously affect religion. Now, there are forces ongoing within religion as a paradigm, or religion as a activity within humanity, that are not good for religion as an activity within humanity, okay? We've got religion is under stress in huge ways, not only in the sense of like religious civil wars, the invasion, the migrants, the George Soros Talmudic Jew collective pimping global racial pollution globally, across the planet here, and paying for all of this social disruption by bringing disparate cultures together. Not only is that ongoing, but we have things like the pressures on Islam. Okay, so Islam is collapsing, guys. It's a failed, okay, so it may be a decent religion, but it is a failure when they adopt it as a social order. There's no Muslim society on this planet that works. That's why they're all trying to come to non-Muslim societies, because it's intolerable to live in Muslim societies These are not ongoing. These are sustainable at a slow grinding level of degradation, with or without the Western world being directed by the Talmudist to fuck with them, right? So Islam collapsed, and the caliphate collapses on its own when it reaches a certain point because of the inherent alteration of a necessary component of a large-scale successful society. That component is bureaucracy. And in Islam, bureaucracy does not work. I'm not going to get into it, but you'll see it over these next coming years. Whether aliens show up here or not, the vast majority of Islamic states are going to undergo their own internal crises, leading to revolts, overthrows, degradation, etc., etc., independent of what's going on in the West. And that's why many, many more of them will want to flee here. So we have to deal with that. We also have the ongoing problems. All right, so we have ongoing problems within the formalized, structured Christian church that's represented by the Catholics. It doesn't exist. The same pressures don't exist in Orthodox Christianity, either of the two main flavors. Okay, so this is just basically the Vatican is. The Vatican will be abandoned, in my opinion. Rather, its view of the world and its churches and structure and all of that, it's degrading. We know this. It's on its way down. Now it's getting to a point where it's struggling with a very existential component, which is they understand that the new paradigm of substrate of supreme consciousness is emerging. And some of the people within the Vatican are trying to get ahead of that and make that part of their paradigm, trying to slot their religious view into that paradigm, and it doesn't work very well. And a lot of their adherents will reject that because they're old and they're dying and they don't want to change and so on, and it's going to cause a real problem for the Vatican and the Catholic Church in that sense. That understanding of Christianity, in my opinion, will be abandoned in like 40 or so years. We're getting to the point where real knowledge about the formation of the Bible and all this stuff is so commonly available that it's pressuring. So you have all of the in denial evangelicals that insist that we're going to go into Revelations and all of that the Bible is still ahead of us, as opposed to an old book that had been written repeatedly and changed every time it was written. So I had 32 Bibles here, right? Some really expensive ones. I gave them all away. I'd gotten them all for individual purposes to see what was in some in it that wasn't in others, and they vary widely, hugely. And I also know that the historiography of it, the what we think of as the history of the Bible in a common parlance, is bullshit. So it is true, it is factual that there are no known writers of the canonic of the Bible that is canonized, right? The Nag Hammadi books, including the Book of Thomas, have books that are actually self-attributing. This, where the scroll says this was written by so and so. Whereas we don't get that with the Bible. The New Testament is horseshit, right? Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John. None of those people wrote those. There were none in the Bible. Whether you're talking Old Testament, the Torah, or New Testament, there were no eyewitness reports. Okay, so all of the New Testament, were written at least a full generation after the time that they're talking about with Jesus, right? So no one that wrote the Bible was around to see any of this shit. And they vary hugely in terms of what they're presenting to you. For instance, if we didn't have Matthew, Matthew is the only source for Jesus being a divine being, okay? For him being the Judeans' Messiah. That's the only source. And it's Matthew's isolated, its language is odd, and so on. So you can get into all of this. We're going to get into that. I guess there'll be people that will really drill down into all of this sort of stuff, right? But the point being that there's going to be schisms within schisms within schisms that will be propelled by the fact that we have to change into this new paradigm in order to be self-sustaining against alien contact. Because humans, especially in officialdom, you don't hear anybody writing articles saying, I wonder if aliens have religion. I wonder how they view the world, and so on, right? Because if we don't know, we're in a really a deep well of hurt, and we can't see our way out of it. So we're going to have to examine all of this stuff. Now, we've got, as I say, we've got pressures on the religions anyway, right, that are coming through the circumstances. So like Islam cannot survive contact with aliens. And here's why. First off, it's degrading now. Like I say, it's not a social order. It's not effective. Islam is, the Book of Muhammad was written by his very young wife. I don't know how young she was, maybe 13 or something. And so Muhammad is out in the desert, or out somewhere where it's hot. He has starts feeling bad in his head. Okay, he literally has a headache, and so he goes and seeks shelter away from the sun in a cave. And within the cave, he supposedly encounters Gabriel, this archangel, who tells him the Quran and makes him recite it and puts it in his head. Anyway, and so Muhammad thinks he's going fucking crazy. He goes back and he tells his wife. His wife goes and tells these other people, and these 3 Christian women convince Muhammad that he's not crazy, that he's actually speaking to God. And anyway, and so that's the birth of Islam. Now, here's the problem with that, though. The way Islam is structured, it is said, and it is you cannot get into Islam without understanding that the Quran is perfect, and it can't be altered ever. And in the Quran, unlike the Bible, there's only one author, right? There's all these other religious books around the Quran, but they're not part. There's no canonizing process by which they could be brought in and make things different. So the book itself says that Muhammad is the last prophet. He's absolutely 100% correct, and this book is perfect, and you can't change it, and never, ever, ever can you advance on anything that's in this book. So it seals you into a period of time in your thinking, and you're not supposed to go out and invent shit or change shit or any of that. This is an aspect of why the Islamic world as a social order is failing. It's very complex, and the Islamic social world is collapsing. Many of the reasons that it is doing so are inherent in the nature of the Quran not being able to be disputed. But, okay, so along come space aliens. Well, the Quran allows for the jinn and demons and stuff, but not for those beings to act outside of the direction or the characteristics provided by the Quran, by Islam, right? And so there's these other books that really get into more into those aspects of it. But in any event, though, so Islam's going to have a real problem. It can't reform itself to the new way of thinking that will emerge as a result of contact with the space aliens, who will be bringing in all this cool shit and all this kind of stuff. But it'll want to. Islamics will want to. And there's going to be, there's other social order pressures that are going to cause Islam real problems relative to the aliens and stuff too, right? But there's also going to be, we're in the midst of a Christian revival. I think that part of this Christian revival will go to the Book of Thomas, that will get into the absolute horseshit ideas in the Bible itself. So, for instance, the Old Testament, Moses wasn't in the first 3 versions, nor was Noah or Daniel. These characters are added later. And there's just so much in in that sort of information about the book itself. So you're free to believe that the Bible is 100% perfect like the Quran, but that will be disputed by the nature of our reality changing over these next couple of years to the point that you're going to have a crisis of faith. And that will strike a lot of people, not only in Christianity, but in Islam. Now, Judaism isn't going to be affected that way. Judaism is going to crash anyway, but they know they worship space aliens. They know they worship the Elohim. That's a plural word, right? They read the Hebrew. They can read about El Elyon and Yahweh and Michael and all of these other fuckers coming down and trashing the Judeans, conquering them and genetically modifying them and all of this kind of stuff. So they understand it, but it's not going to aid them because we're not going to be dealing with the Elohim necessarily. Although, you got to say that the latest pictures of 3i Atlas really do look like the description in the book of Ezekiel about the wheel of fire in the sky. So we'll see what's going to pop up off of 3i Atlas as it's heading out. Who knows, maybe it'll come back again. Anyway, so I have reasons to think we're coming to a number of crises points in 2026 as we get into this next, into the transition phase out of the hangover period of the Kali Yuga. And we're going to go through this paradigm change. We're going to get to the point where there's an official acknowledgement of aliens, and that's all it's going to take because they're here, right? And here's the thing: we are at statistics would tend to show that there's going to be some form of a much wider alien encounter in this next year, okay? Just based on how frequently we've had encounters, the number of encounters each year, and the types and the where. And so here's the thing. There's like thousands, maybe 3,000 or 4,000 encounters with space alien ships within 10 miles of the U.S. West Coast, okay, in the water. And thousands of these things. Same on the East Coast. I don't know how many. I'm on the West Coast, and I'm more concerned with these things right in here because they're reasonably local to me. And I think that statistically, what we're likely to encounter in our alien exposure next year will be something of a underseas issue, right? And so we'll have to adjust our understanding, and Britannia doesn't rule the waves or any of that kind of shit. And I think the humans are going to kind of like retreat back to land to a certain extent as we come to understand that the ocean is populated with another species, the scummers, as I put in my book. But not to be prejudiced against them. There's just some other species down there. And here's the thing, guys. It cares far more about our military capabilities than any other aspect of humanity, right? They may be tapping our internet and getting everything they need off of that. I would suppose so. They probably understand all of our languages and such. But nonetheless, they are actively surveilling our military, and it's becoming less and less episodic. So it used to be that, there'd be a flurry of reports of UFOs and USOs around aircraft carriers, right? Now it's just ubiquitous around all kinds of military actions and so on, all up and down the West Coast, extends to some extent down through Central America, but nowhere near as intense as it is off of North America. So we can presume, just statistically, that the aliens are going to be interacting with North America more than any other place because they already are. And when it comes out that they're, when we have a more open interaction, which I think we're getting very close to, I suspect it will be more around North America than elsewhere. So anyway, so just sort of a heads up on that. And we don't know, right? So they're surveilling our military. If they were humans and we caught them surveilling our military, right? Like, so if they were Antarcticans, right? So say there was a population down there and we knew about them and we caught them surveilling our military. Well, if they were humans, we would think that they were up to no good. And I think that we need to presume there's at least some potential that that's the case with the aliens. If they're here, if they're peaceful in that sense, they haven't attacked us, although they do all of these weird things. They shut our battleships down and shut down the nuke reactors and all of that kind of stuff. However, you could see that, I could see that even as a form of communication, not necessarily an overt aggressive act, right? And so their behavior could be taken in a couple of ways at this stage. But one of the ways it can be taken is that they're preparing for military action. And to some degree. I don't think they're here to take us over or anything, but they may decide to assert their power and say, no, you people can't bring your boats to this part of the ocean, that we own this. And at some point like that, then we're going to have a real serious social crisis, because it shows how pitifully weak human military minds, organization, and paradigm are, right? And you'll see in my opinion, you'll see that it's going to be the paradigm that's going to affect all of the human minds to the greatest degree, and they won't be able to get their heads out of their ass relative to decent thinking about our situation. And they'll be making a lot of mistakes because they'll be coming from this idea of the gritology or their religion or whatever. So, like, I'm not denigrating him, but there's a guy out there, David Sereda, and he thinks that 3i Atlas is here at specific points in its journey through our solar system on specific days because those days had religious significance, right? And it's a little wonky. They're not even, all the days are not even in this year. So he's saying, because it's near this planet at this particular date, this date relates to some religious observant 3 years ago, and on a lunar calendar and all of this kind of stuff. So he's shoveling the actual process of 3i Atlas through our solar system into a religious context, right? This is the kind of shit that humans are going to do, and it's going to come and bite them in the ass. So, in my opinion, David Sereda would have a really hard time if we get a military standoff with aliens in the ocean. It's going to upset him very greatly. It's going to upset all these love and light people very greatly. They're going to freak out because they don't have the mental fortitude to consider themselves in contention with this unknown species. The only way they can perceive of them is though they were gods and benign and all of that. In my opinion, that's a patsy approach. That's a weak-minded approach that's going to get you into some real trouble. Anyway, so happy Christmas message here, right? But just to let you know, and I think we'll overcome this. We'll get through it all. It's going to be quite chaotic, as I say, and then we'll have the cascading impacts that last for decades as we resort and get back into a new paradigm and a new understanding of science and all this kind of thing. We don't have to throw out the old gritology understanding. We just have to provide it with a hook to the actual source, and not imagine things like, dark matter or dark comets and shit, just inventing things to fill gaps in our understanding. Anyway, guys, Heidi and I say happy Manifestation Day tomorrow. You guys have a good, relaxing holiday. And after the New Year's, then we can start getting into the fun stuff. All righty.